Renekton is one of the first revealed ascended god warriors, trapped for an eternity with Xerath whilst his words slowly tormented him and drove him insane. His uncontrolled rage and power makes him a real danger to the Shuremans in the lore and those who dare to stand against the magnificent empire. But how did the crocodile cope in the pro leagues? Today, we shine the competitive spotlight on Renekton, the Butcher of the Sands.
Chaos will follow.
League's Killer Croc has been there since patch 109 way back in January 2011. He was there to see the first World season. Sadly though, he saw them from the sidelines. He didn't show up at all. In fact, he was only picked twice in all of 150 Season 1 games. Even with that, Renekton only managed to snap up one victory. The two games weren't by any particular player or with any particular team style. Renekton was just picked up like so many others. The meta just wasn't very stable in Season 1 and it wasn't a great opening season for Renekton. Season 2 was another year with Renekton absent from the World Championships. However, there were nearly 1,000 professional games played over the year and Renekton did find some moments to shine. The EU leagues lapped him up, appearing in a number of games during DreamHack, almost 25% of the EU summer finals. This wasn't due to any particular strength in a patch, as he also showed up in spring. In fact, the only balance focus Renekton had during 2012 was a slight nerf to the armor shredding on his E. A similar story to the first season, where there seemed to be no real rhyme or reason for the Renekton picks. He wasn't picked to counter anything particularly or fit into any team style, so in total, Renekton wasn't particularly influential on the season. Season 3 saw no buffs or nerfs to Renekton, but did see the meta stabilise, and a large part of that stability came from Renekton's insanely strong early game, seeing the second most play of any top laner. Renekton cut down late game threats like Jax or Rumble before they had a chance to climb up and run riot, whilst also being able to build tanky and scale with the tanks into the late game. There was an item back in Season 3 called the Brutalizer, and it gave armor pen, AD and CDR, or in today's terms, ability haste. It was relatively cheap, and it built into the Black Cleaver which we all know today. The item was an easy first buy to really put the killer in the croc and dominate the early game. There was no need to upgrade it for a large portion of the game either, as the stat per cold value it gave was massive. With this stick in his arsenal, tabby building tanks could be steamrolled in the early game, and this showed with the incredible win rate of 67%. When it came to the Renekton player base, however, it was quite small. Only 8 players picked him up during Worlds, and not one of them from the American LCS. This is particularly surprising, as during the LCS Spring Playoff, Renekton had an 80% presence. The player who did pick him up, however, was SKT's Impact, showing off the crocodile spin with 5 games and winning all 5 of them. A huge KDA of 12.25, he effortlessly mowed down the competition. Even Dyrus playing on meta favourite Rumble couldn't stand up against him, with Impact finishing 6-2-10 with a CS lead of over 100. So with no major changes during the season, huge early game presence with good base stats, hard CC and the ability to build tanky items whilst countering tanks and late game carries, Renekton was an unstoppable force during Season 3. The same could not be said for Season 4, however. 2014 really saw the downfall of the Sandy Crocodile. Renekton saw a nerf to his ult during the early stage of Season 4, losing both bonus health and damage per second. Even an increase to his base stats didn't save the Sunblessed being. To add insult to injury, rival Rumble received buffs allowing the small Yordle to put the Croc back in his place. The effect of this nerf can be seen in every region. LPL Spring 72% presence down to 7 in the summer. EU LCS was 75% down to 4. The only server to not give up on Renekton were the Americans, with Renekton still seeing 32% of games in the summer season, but the win rate of over 60% in spring dropped to less than 48% in the summer. Ryze had become king of the top lane, he outranged Renekton, and with Frozen Fist and tier scaling well together, Ryze had the armor to sustain against Renekton, the CC to keep him away, and the range to keep him off farm. The nerf absolutely devastated Renekton and ended his time in competitive league for Season 4. As if Riot's Reptile hadn't had enough pain, Renekton started Season 5 with a nerf to his early game. Granted, the Shureman God had some late game buffs, but Renekton's strength has always been that of an early game bully. He now lost more fury per second, had lower healing on Q, and until a bug fix 8 patches later, didn't get the health from his ult for over quarter of a second. Season 5 saw nearly 2,000 games, and Renekton managed to get picked in only 36 of them. Even then, he couldn't even win 40% of those games. The top meta he faced into included picks that sound odd today, but were feared in 2015. Lulu stopped Renekton getting close, and Fiora had a full rework to increase her dueling skills. Rumble still existed as well, now less afraid of Renekton's all-in with his stronger shields. But more than all all of these threats, Gangplank laughed Renekton out of the league, Q making crocodile tears flow for the early game before barrels produced real tears in the mid and late. Even if the TikTok croc caught the captain, an orange allowed the salty sailor to walk away with ease. Renekton was set up to fail from the start of Season 5, and it didn't get better at any point during the season. Riot continued to ignore Renekton during Season 6, only briefly considering the croc in patch 6.15 with a measly increase on the DPS of his ult. There was an incredibly exciting top lane meta with tanks, fighters, AP champions, of course led by Rumble, but with 2,200 games played during 2016, Renekton only saw 11, not even 1% across the entire season. Renekton was on his knees during Season 6, still hurting from the huge nerfs in Season 4 and 5. The minuscule buff in Season 6 did not help Renekton come back at all. Season 7 was a really odd one for Renekton. There were some bug fixes in a patch, followed by more bug fixes in another patch, followed by some more bug fixes, which destabilized the player base and pro scene so much that they got reverted in the next patch as well. But Season 7 did see some return to form for Renekton. Season 7 was the year of tanks, and those present will remember how oppressive tanks were. Players had tried everything to deal with them, and Renekton's early game bullying was certainly one consistent way. MMD from Flash Wolves was particularly aware of that. During the season, MMD picked up the croc multiple times, and researchers had prepared teams against them. The pick was uncommon enough to not warrant training counterplay, just ban him. And as such, almost out of nowhere, Renekton saw 7 bans away from key players, including MMD. The one time Team Solo mid let their guard down with this, Renekton tore Hauntz's Cho'Gath apart 6-0-2. No opportunity at all was given to the Terror of the Void to grow in size. Flash Wolves finished this game in less than 25 minutes in a season where the average game time was nearly 40. On top of this notable appearance at Worlds, Renekton also saw huge play during the season, appearing in nearly 1,000 of the 3,000 games played. With over 400 bans, it was clear that people were afraid of the croc. Similar to the showcase he received in Worlds, Renekton was devastating for stopping tanks, getting ahead, building Blade of the Ruined King to eat their HP, and then bully them out of lane. Despite not really showing up for Worlds, Renekton finally seemed to fit into the League Pro scene again. Pre-Season 8 was when Riot stepped in and stopped the tank meta, and as such, Renekton's tank-busting niche fell away. There were nearly 5,000 games played in Professional League during 2018, and Renekton saw just over 100. With a win rate down at 39%. With no large buffalo to prey on, the crocodile was forced to go for scraps, and he couldn't keep up with the swift champions like Aatrox, Irelia, and Camille. The few tanks that did show up were picked for their global pressure outside of lane, and Renekton could bully Shen or Sion all day, but he couldn't stop their ults winning bot lane. Renekton was forced to choose between Ignite and Teleport, which was a huge problem for Renekton. The combat stats Ignite brought played perfectly with his bullying game style, but it didn't help his team like Teleport could. When playing Renekton, you had to choose whether you're going to have the extra kill pressure that Ignite brought, or the global pressure that Teleport brought, and this choice was crippling to Renekton players. And as such, both in and out of Worlds, Renekton faded into the depths for Season 8, waiting for his time to strike. Renekton didn't have to wait too long before slicing through Season 9, however. The Conqueror rework played perfectly into his scaly hands. A buff late in Season 8 to his armor penetration, alongside buffs to his early game healing and base stats, saw Renekton back on the Rift. The Tormented Divine Being was feared on the Rift, being banned in over half of all games, and if he did make it to the Rift, his laning was oppressive as ever. The combat stats from Conqueror allowed Renekton to look away from Ignite and take Teleport, bringing the map pressure that he'd previously lacked. Moreover, the healing buffs meant that the sustain was good enough for Renekton to press the attack into some matchups, and just burst down lane opponents with oppressive lane control. To add to the stack of corpses the God Warrior had piling up, Spear of Shojin was live this season. An item that gave huge bonuses during ultimate ability casts. It gave ability cooldown on hit and bonus attack speed. It was everything Renekton could have ever wanted, and as soon as Renekton hit 6, his ult meant a single burst could see you playing League in black and white mode. The terrifying burst that Renekton brought even allowed him to move into the mid lane. Both Phoenix and Damwon flexed Renekton into the mid lane during Worlds to surprise and decimate their opponents. Showmaker and Doinby both had KDAs over 7 for this incredible flex pick. Similar to Season 4, a final buff to Renekton could be traced through the stats of Season 9. In 9.14, Empowered W began removing shields. Finally, Renekton laughed in the face of Rumble, who, to be honest, wasn't really present in Season 9, but Renekton laughed regardless, finally clambering on top of that pesky Yordle. Renekton went from almost no play at all in the early half of Season 9 up to the monster with nearly 80% presence at the end of the season. Finally, the Ascended Warrior had climbed to the top of the competitive scene and was a feared champion through the latter half of Season 9. Another season where Riot seemed to forget the Butcher of the Sands. Only a few bug fixes were seen on Renekton in the patch notes, but no changes meant no nerfs. And with tanks like Ornn, Shen and Set rearing their heads, Renekton happily picked up Blade of the Ruined King again. The item played well on Renekton. With the old passive stealing speed and health shredding, Renekton could continue to bully top laners, especially tanks. Only Poppy could really control the God Warrior. Her Q prevented him dictating the lane and allowed her to build her tank stats slowly and then outscale him. Every other tank, however, could not stop Renekton forcing them out of lane. And should they choose to group with their team, Conqueror and Press the Attack continued to allow Renekton to forego Ignite and take Teleport, ensuring that he was always there, waiting for every fight. Ironically, Renekton's true power wasn't seen at Worlds again. Players across the world feared Team Whatever's Morgan on the God Warrior. Morgan boasted a huge 72.4% win rate over 29 games on Renekton. And I'd love to tell you what situations Morgan picked Renekton into, but frankly, they picked up the croc whenever they could. Morgan built Blade of the Ruined King some games, Ravenous Hydra some games, sometimes they rushed Black Cleaver, sometimes Morgan built tank, sometimes Morgan built damage. The WE top lane deserved the reputation that they earned with Renekton, as even when you knew the croc was going top lane, you had no idea which type of crocodile you were facing. However, Team Whatever didn't make it to Season 10 Worlds, and therefore Morgan didn't make it to Season 10 Worlds. Renekton's strength did shine through, it just wasn't oppressive as it could be, but this was another season where Renekton dominated. Season 11 brought some huge item changes, and Renekton remained a top threat during the early part of the season. Renekton had a huge early game, with the new Stride Breaker giving him an extra dash, slow, and damage that Renekton could then follow up with Armor Shred on his E and Stun on his W. It was difficult to escape the Killer Croc once he engaged upon you. Although the Stride Breaker change did see some drop in Renekton, he was already on his way out before this change hit. Nerfs had hit Renekton hard. 11.4 saw a reduction on Q heal, 11.6 saw bonus health on ult decrease, and 11.12 saw even more heal reductions. By the time World 2021 came around, Renekton had even seen a drop in the stun duration of his W. Moreover, mobility creep meant that the inability to stick to a target was a problem, and losing Stride Breaker made that problem way more visible. So to summarise, Renekton had less CC if he did catch you, and with Stride Breaker changes, it was harder for him to catch you. Even his old friend Blade of the Ruined King had abandoned him. A change from an active ability to a passive one made it harder for him to trigger when he wanted. Top lane was dominated by champions like Graves, Gwen and Gnar, all of whom had good mobility. Gnar was a huge issue, particularly for Renekton. With his strong poke, great mobility, and insultingly, more bonus health on his passive than Renekton gained on his ult, Gnar took 65% of the games they matched each other in. Renekton did try to survive with Gore Drinker and was quite successful on it, but without the lockdown, he could be kited to death by these mobile champions, and as such, fell out of the meta. Much like his games, Renekton had a strong early presence in Season 11, but it fell off as the season continued on. So, when we look at Renekton under a competitive spotlight, he appears to take on the hunting tactics of his nature counterpart, lurking just under the surface, waiting for his time to strike, but when that time comes, nothing can stop him. Renekton was either key to the meta or absent. There was no real in-between for the crocodile. At the time of recording, Renekton is continuing to show his early game strength. He's been in nearly 75% of the Season 12 games so far, with a decent 55% win ratio. But League is getting faster, and the early game is ending sooner, so can Renekton actually keep up with League? What would you like to see changed for Renekton? For example, I'd like to see him game a little bit more lockdown, maybe a slight slow on empowered Q or the aura of his ult, but maybe slightly less damage on them as well. This would take away from some of that early game bullying, but also make him more valuable in team fights. But I want to hear what you guys think, and who do you think the competitive spotlight should shine on next? Let me know in the comments below. With all that said, I want to take a moment to thank Boomslang from Reddit, and all of you on Reddit in fact, for the feedback on these videos. I'm currently updating the datasheet so that I have all of the season's data in a sortable way. That way I can expand away from Worlds more and more with each video. I'm sure you can understand the huge amount of data required for this. I've actually got data on over 25,000 games of professional League of Legends, so it takes a bit of time to format it and sort it. With that said though, the feedback is invaluable, and it helps me improve this series, and I hope that I can be a positive member of the League of Legends community. So really, thank you. And although I didn't really want to say this because of the name, thank you, Captain Bulge, for this. You are the first person that requested a champion on this channel, and I really, really appreciate that engagement. Anyway, with all that said, I'll see you next time.